Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Jack Hagel. North Carolina has an open U.S. Senate seat. The leaders are Democrat Cheri Beasley and Republican Ted Budd. And in a state almost evenly split between Republican, Democratic, and unaffiliated voters, it's anyone's guess who will win out. WRAL state government reporter Travis Fain has been following the race closely, and he's here to tell us where things stand. Travis, welcome back.
Yeah, thanks for having me again.
For those who haven't been following the race, set the scene. Who are the candidates? What seat are they chasing? And who has the edge?
Yeah, like you said, it's an open seat. So current U.S. Senator Richard Burr, he's a Republican. He's retiring, not running for re-election. So we've got former Chief Justice of the state Supreme Court, Cheri Beasley. She is the Democrat in the race. The Republican is Congressman Ted Budd, who I think has served about 6 years in Congress from the Greensboro area. There's also a Libertarian in the race. There's a Green Party candidate in the race. They have never polled at any sort of level. This is essentially a two-person race to win this Senate seat, which is hugely important, not just for who's representing people here, but for control of the United States Senate.
That's right. Yeah. So this has more to do than just state representation, right? There's national eyes on this.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, look, there's only 100 seats in the United States Senate. It's pretty much evenly divided right now. In fact, the Vice President Harris is the tie-breaking vote, so every seat counts. It seems, based on the spending and the way the attention has been, that this seat is less important to Democrats than it is to Republicans, as both sides kind of try to jockey for full control of the Senate. But look, like you said, we don't know who's going to win this thing, and there are a handful of Senate races that are really in play in the United States this year, and we're one of them.
So given their backgrounds, comparing these candidates is probably a little bit harder than other races where you might have two lawmakers running against each other where they have a voting record. How can voters sort of compare these two? It's kind of like comparing apples and oranges, but there's got to be a way to do it.
So what we did, we asked each campaign to give us a list, 3 to 5 things for Congressman Budd, votes that he was proud of, votes that he took in the U.S. Congress that he was proud of. And then we asked the Beasley folk, all right, give us 3 to 5 votes that Budd took that you think people should focus on. So not things that he would necessarily be proud of, but like what the Beasley campaign wants us to look at. And then we flipped it and we said, all right, Beasley campaign, give us 3 to 5 cases where you were very proud of the decision you came to as a member of the Supreme Court, or when you were an attorney, if there was a client, a case you were particularly proud of. And then, of course, flipped it for the Budd folks and said, give us 3 to 5 things on Beasley's record you don't like. So, I mean, that's kind of a lot of rigmarole there. But it helps them. A lot of this stuff is going to be stuff that you've seen in campaign commercials, and it just helps us narrow the window of what we're going to analyze as far as their records.
So very broadly, what did you find out? What are these candidates running on, and what are their key issues, and what do voters get if they win?
So at a high level, the Budd is trying to paint Beasley as soft on crime, as a rubber stamp for the Biden agenda, President Joe Biden, as bad for the economy. Kind of a lot of the things that you would see any Republican say about any Democrat right now. Beasley will say, hey, look, Ted Budd has been in Congress 6 years, so all the things that he's complaining about, maybe he should have tried to address them prior to now. She will argue that he votes against the average North Carolinian's interest and in favor of wealthier corporations instead. And then when you look at what they were most proud of, the things that they listed, the number one for Beasley on the list that she gave us, she says that more than 98% of her rulings as a judge were upheld by the higher court. Higher courts, obviously judges. She was not always a Supreme Court justice. She moved up through the ranks. And then with Budd, his number one thing on his list was that he voted for the Trump tax cuts, which was in 2017. Those were business tax cuts primarily, but also had quite a bit of personal income tax relief, lower rates for personal income taxes at the federal level. I asked him, would you make permanent the income tax cuts in that 2017 Trump tax cut package? And he said yes. He also is proud that he supported the USMCA deal. That's the U.S., Mexico, Canada trade deal. It's fairly complicated, but that's one of the things he pointed to. So a lot of the way they're defining themselves is by saying what the other person is. But there are some things, if you push them a little bit, you can get them to say about themselves.
Let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll hear a little bit more about where Beasley and Budd stand on the issues and what they're doing to win voters as they enter the home stretch. Welcome back to the WRAL Daily Download. We're talking with WRAL state government reporter Travis Fain about the race for North Carolina's open U.S. Senate seat. Travis, you recently took part in an episode of On the Record about the race. Tell us about those interviews.
It was interesting. My colleague Laura Leslie handled the interview with former Justice Beasley. I handled Congressman Budd. I found him, the knock on him as this race kind of started was that he was media shy and maybe that he wasn't so good at interviews. I found that he answered most of my questions, maybe not yes or no. We don't really expect that a lot of times from politicians, but I felt like if you watch this interview, you will know a lot more about Ted Budd and that it was a good interview. It didn't try to filibuster me as some people do. We talked about the economy, inflation, immigration. January 6th, he was one of the Congress members of Congress that voted against certifying elections in a couple of states, even after the attack on the Capitol, January 6th. We talked about energy policy. He's an all-of-the-above guy with a particular kind of focus, I would say, on increasing drilling. Kind of, you might hear Republicans call it, unleashing American energy. When we talked about what would you do on inflation, most of his answer was about increasing energy, making that easier to produce here in the United States.
Abortion is also a very big issue this election cycle. Where do the candidates stand on that?
So Beasley has said repeatedly that she wants to codify Roe versus Wade. Now what that means, it's a little bit of a moving target, but it's not much of one. I mean, the way Roe, the structure of it was that abortion could be made illegal by the states after viability of the child. So once the fetus or the child in the womb is viable, which is 22 weeks, 24 weeks. I've read that back when the Roe versus Wade decision came down, it was 28 weeks. Obviously, we've gotten better with the medical technology so that children that come out earlier can survive. So, look, bottom line, codify Roe v. Wade. That's what Sherry Beasley wants. Ted Budd, he has signed on to a bill in Congress that would essentially make abortion illegal except in cases with medical emergencies after 15 weeks. He has pushed previously, though, it said he would push back to conception. And he's fairly open about that. He says, look, I'm pro-life, 100% pro-life. So I think it's probably reasonable when Beasley and others say, if you elect him, this is a vote to really restrict abortion, even though politically, I don't know that it would go much beyond 15 weeks. It depends on a lot more things than just the North Carolina Senate race there.
Another subplot of this race has been who can be the law and order candidate. One might think that Sherry Beasley, considering her role as a former Chief Justice, would sort of easily grab that. But Budd has gotten some key endorsements, and so there's been a little bit of battle there. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, multiple law enforcement organizations in North Carolina have endorsed Congressman Budd in this race. Beasley is not. She's not conceding the law enforcement issue. She pushes back a lot on this idea that she's soft on crime, which is something the Budd campaign is trying to hit like a drumbeat. And I mean, look, Supreme Court cases are complicated. You're making law essentially through your decision for the entirety of the state. So when people cherry pick, this one criminal was able to not have to wear a GPS monitoring device because of this case. Well, the case wasn't really about, if you've seen these commercials, I imagine, the case wasn't really about just this one person. It was about what is the appropriate level of monitoring for people on the sex offenders list. But there is so little, I think, that we do about crime at the federal level. It is such a local and state issue. But you see it does rise to the top when crime is on the upswing or people have the perception that it's on the upswing, and I think it probably is on the upswing right now. And a lot of it is about rhetoric and tone and this Republican argument that Democrats have not properly supported law enforcement. And, of course, Democrats will say, well, law enforcement is not always right. And, of course, law enforcement isn't always right. We've seen that time and time again. So that there's this core battle, for lack of a better word, in our country about how the best way is to support law enforcement and what it means to properly do that.
So as we come into the home stretch, these candidates are now starting to get a lot more attention. We're seeing some big names come to the Triangle. Last week we saw a few. Can you tell us about who's coming, who's stumping for whom, and whether or not that's going to have any difference? And is that unique?
Well, Dave Matthews of the Dave Matthews Band was in town for Sherry Beasley last week. Senator Ted Cruz, obviously a prominent Texas Republican, he was in town for Ted Budd. Maybe the biggest news, though, was that former President Barack Obama endorsed Beasley last week. Now, I don't know that that's going to translate to a visit, but I think that would be a sign that Democrats see an opening there, that to drive turnout, because that's what these visits are about, right? You're not bringing Ted Cruz to town because there's an undecided voter somewhere who's going to be like, oh man, well, if Ted Cruz says that Ted Budd's a good guy, maybe I haven't thought hard enough about this. It's about getting things out there, getting your name out there, and kind of increasing that energy on your side for your base. For
Beasley, can Obama's name be a bigger draw than, say, President Biden?
I think so. I think Obama, look, when you get out of office as a president, the thing you do about 3 months later is get more popular, usually. And so that helps. And I mean, Obama is somewhat connected to the economy, but not like a Joe Biden or Kamala Harris. It's when you're in charge, everything that goes wrong is your fault. And so I think that's probably why Beasley has kind of avoided Biden, doesn't really seem to want him to come visit. Doesn't really. I mean, when your opponent is saying you'll be a rubber stamp for him, you don't really want to bring the man to North Carolina. But I would think an Obama visit would be huge. I have no information that it's going to happen, but if it does happen, I think that tells you something.
And I also wonder, would that support from Obama for Beasley in any way help Budd?
I think a lot of things are pretty well baked in at this point. By the end of this weekend that we've just had, I bet there'll have been 1.5 million people who voted, maybe 1 million. Early voting will have another week to go or so. Most people early vote. Most people who are going to vote in this election will have voted before Election Day. So the decisions have, by and large, been made. Now, if it's a very close election, those last few undecided voters, they make a big difference. But if it's not, then, the cake is largely baked.
Well, we'll find out if any of that has helped come Election Day, and I know you'll be watching closely. Thanks, Travis.
Yep, thank you.
That's WRAL state government reporter Travis Fain. To see his latest coverage of the state's U.S. Senate race and to watch a related episode of On the Record, visit WRAL.com. Thanks for listening to the WRAL Daily Download. You can also listen to entire WRAL newscasts in podcast form. Find WRAL Newscasts in your podcast app. The feed is updated with new newscasts multiple times per day.